So I actually had gonna embarrass myself by saying I made a little bit of a mistake. This is the question that I had actually planned to take out because it's a little complicated in its actual answer, and I decided after I'd written it that it's too many complications. So is there a way for us to not count this one? All right. So the question here is, where will a vapor barrier be located? And our choices are just below the siding material, on the cold side of the insulation, just inside the interior finish material. There is no vapor barrier in commercial buildings. Well, there actually is a vapor barrier in commercial buildings, although not always, not 100% of the time, because it can be a little complicated, but typically there is. And then the question is, where should it be? The typical answer in a temperate zone, which this is a temperate zone, would be C, just inside the interior finish material. And the reason we call it the interior finish material and not a more specific thing is there can be a lot of different, could be Durock in some locations, it could be drywall in other locations, a bunch of different elements. And the reason for that is in a temperate zone, when it gets cold enough and you have moisture by people breathing, people making coffee, all of those kinds of things, you have moisture building up on the inside, you'll find that it will create a force difference between the dryness outside and the general level of moisture in the air on the inside, and that moisture will force its way right through the wall. The reason I was going to take this one out, though, is that with commercial structures, it starts getting very complicated. And in temperate locations, most temperate places, this would be the case. But if you're in the kind of southernmost element, but still in temperate, you might see it a little differently. So that was why I sort of changed my mind on this question. So I'm going to answer C, but like I said, it's a little more complicated than that.
Okay, good. I like that.
Yeah, sorry about that one. And for all of you who sweat over that one, sorry about that. I didn't mean to give you trouble. Number 7.
You know what? Actually, that's an interesting thought. In a way, that's almost like one of these test questions. You know, sometimes as you're taking the exam, you're like really thrown off by a question. You're like, what the hell does this mean?
Yeah.
Like it could be this, it could be that. It could also be that the question is actually doesn't count. And it's actually one of these questions that NCARB is testing to find out if it's a good question.
Yeah, because one of the ways that they get all of these questions is, out of the 100 questions that you might get on an exam, maybe 95 of them are going to count, but maybe 5 of them are like, well, let's try these 5 and see what happens. And then you're the guinea pig on those 5. And then, 6 months later, those might be real questions for somebody else. And it could be more than that. It could be, like I remember when sustainability issues really first started kicking up 15 years ago or so, everywhere we were talking to, people would go off and take the exam and they'd come back and they'd say, oh my God, you wouldn't believe how many sustainability issue questions we had. And that was just because NCARB was trying desperately to catch back up. And so they would have a few that were real and counting, but then they were testing a whole bunch more, and so they had maybe 10, 15 test questions on anybody's exam. At this point, it's not likely to be that. You're going to get a few here and there, and some are just going to be poorly written, and like that one is a good example of a poorly written, he says a little shamedly, that's an example of a poorly written question, and don't worry about it. Answer the question, move on, because who knows.